Good morning. We are here with Master Sculptor Roberto Santo. First question, where do you find your inspiration?
Mainly from dreams. Mainly, I have these dreams where I wake up in the middle of the night, and I start a vision kind of comes to me, and I don't really, it doesn't evolve from that dream, but it starts with the dream. There's an essence of kind of a visual thing that happens, and then conceptually, it continues night after night, and the next thing I know is, I'm drawing, designing, doing all kinds of versions of what I think I saw and what I felt. Then at the end of that, it gets into a pretty serious, in-depth exploration of how I'm going to make it happen, because it doesn't always. What I end up sculpting is not always 100% reflection of what my dreams are. It evolves from the beginning as a dream, and then develops into a concept for me, and then I live inside the concept.
And then the dreams stop?
No, I never stop dreaming. It occupies my head all the time. It just maybe gets smaller and smaller, the occupation of the dream. So my head gets filled with thousands and thousands of images.
Now, you grew up in an artistic environment. Your father, Bob Peak, having been one of the most famous illustrators of our time. How did that affect your artistic development?
Well, very unusual living in an artistic family, because it's not the normal everyday, day-to-day thing. I remember my dad bringing me to the Met when I was about 9, having major discussions about Rodin and Picasso, and it was the beginnings of a complete life of art. It was 24 hours a day. My dad was totally compulsive, so everything that he investigated, I seemed to be a part of. And then when I was very young, he brought me into his studio when I was about 9, and I started painting for him, doing, color washes for backgrounds and stuff like that, which was actually a cool experience for me. And my mother was also an abstract painter and just a brilliant colorist. So I learned a lot from that whole time period.
So throughout your life, you have created art in many different mediums: photography, graphic design, film documentaries, painting, and sculpture. What was this journey like for you, passing through all of these different art forms?
Well, at the very beginning, when I was very young with my dad, we started drawing in the studio. And he was an incredible draftsman. So it went from me drawing with him to just this pretty serious involvement of schooling after. And when I first went to the art center, I started out as in the transportation, the car designing area, which was my beginning of really diving pretty seriously into clay forms, because that's how you construct cars and design cars, and realize them. And then my mind went very quickly into photography, because it seemed like photography was an instantaneous thing for me. It didn't take 10 weeks to do it. It didn't take 6 months to do it. It was just strictly a put the camera in front of somebody when you knew it was the right moment, you could take the picture, and that was it. So it started out as that, because I really enjoyed the idea of the spontaneity of it being just a moment, a fragment of time. But as things went along, it started to change in my mind because the photograph is strictly a one-dimensional object. And I really started getting involved in this idea of this three-dimensional thing. I was really involved in light and how light hits a form. And then I became very interested in history and, the Greek and the Roman history and things like that. So, and how they actually visualized and they perceived a specific image versus how we do it today. And then there was a third thing. Well, back to this schooling thing. Then I became a professional photographer at the beginning, and that was good, because it gave me the creativity of color, and which is something that does not exist as much in the world of sculpture. So you take patinas in my work that I do now, and the patinas are it's a very controlled, very thought out process. When I was a photographer, it was more of what could I do to make it innovative and exciting for the viewer. Now the innovation and the excitement isn't necessarily with the color. It's with the impact of the imagery.
I understand that you struggle with the patina.
Well, when you're a sculptor and you start with clay, I do a lot of work in marble as well, but marble is a different subject. When you start with clay and it's a gray, it's a complete gray entity, a monochromatic scene. Then suddenly, when you get into the bronze becomes gold. And then after the bronze becoming gold, then finally you say, okay, now what color am I going to make it? And the idea of the absence of color is something that intrigues me because it leads more for the viewer to really think about the imagery and not about the shock therapy of the color like they had in the 50s and the pop art and stuff like that. So for me, it was more of an experimentation that I would go through. And the hard part is that you live with something in a monochromatic gray scheme, and then suddenly it's the patina that I put on the sculptures. Underneath it, there's multiple layers of color that are then hidden by an overlayer, and that's just gets pretty interesting to deal with.
You have said before that as an artist, you are constantly evolving. Why is this so important to you?
Well, I think there are two ways to be an artist, in my opinion. One way is to be the Rembrandt, which is you study a certain kind of thing, that's what your medium is that paint, and the light and the shadow and the darkness, that's your thing, and that's what you want to explore for the rest of your life. Some people get into that, and I think a lot of people think that if you aren't in that same vein for your entire existence, that you haven't gone in deep enough, to your craft. And one of the things that I really love about art is that art is so eye-opening in all directions that you can actually come in and you can start on something that's start on a figurative piece that then evolves into kind of a transcending of form, and it totally changes your viewpoint as you start. The other problem that I have is that my attention span is fairly short, so I usually work on about 3 or 4 pieces, minimum of 3 pieces at one time, because I have a hard time staying inside that area because I'm so concentrated that when I pull out of it, and I need to pull out of it to go to another area to then revisit it and see what the heck I've been doing. I have to go from one thing to another thing to another thing, because suddenly, I was in the studio and I'm doing these dark patinas, and then I don't know what it was. All of a sudden I just looked down and saw a little piece of metal on the ground and realized that wow, what if you were to take these images and you were to cover them in, instead of a patina, in kind of a nickel finish where part of it's polished and part of it's dull, and what would that add to it? So I have a tendency to just kind of evolve my sculpture as time goes. I'm very much a free flower when it comes to that kind of thing.
So where are you headed now in your next evolution?
Well, I mean, I love doing what I do. I love taking something that feels like it's almost historical reference, and then bringing it into modern day time, kind of like as a transcending of time. But at the same time, I've been playing with this idea of extremely abstract shapes. And sometimes the reality of the figurative work that I do, in my mind, is an abstract shape. And so I'm kind of fascinated right now at this moment with this idea of what would happen if I had a certain amount of moments to actually conceive something. And so I'm working on some pieces that are in that direction. In the last 4 or 5 years, I've been doing some very, very, very large abstract paintings that are very geometric and have a lot to do with balance. That maybe has to do with the fact that I was living in Italy full time, and then I decided to go back and forth between California and Italy. So when you do that, your mind suddenly changes. It's kind of like going from the impressionistic period to total modern art, conceptual art, and that interrupts my my path.
You're referring to the spring load paintings.
Right. I like to deal with these shapes that feel like they're teeter-tottering, but at the same time they feel fixed at the same time. It's very similar to, in my mind, it's very similar to what I do sculpturally with the figure as well, because I try to put things a little bit seeming as though they're ready to fall apart. Well, even in the paintings, I add three-dimensional objects to the paintings, so that the painting becomes a three-dimensional entity rather than just a straightforward flat piece of art. I don't see the need to keep something flat. Why, we live in a three-dimensional world, so why would you limit yourself to a flat plane?
You have just finished your own version of the Pieta, and it has widely been received by the Italian press as Pieta for the new generation. It's spectacular. How do you feel about that?
When you do any kind of religious work, it's you get sucked in conceptually, like I do with all my work. But you get sucked in, and you live with that for as long as from the beginning of when you first thought about it to when it's finished. I think that I tried to, and I think I accomplished actually, saying something different than what Michelangelo said, and a little bit of a different thought process, which I think is really important in this with the generation that's going on right now. But I still go back and forth between my work as a sculptor with historical kind of and mythological things to doing stuff that's modern. I mean, who is it that ever sat down and said that Picasso could only do the blue period? Whoever told him that was it, and that he had to put down his brush? I mean, he did ceramics, he did all kinds of stuff, so, the full gamut of things. And I really think that nowadays, with the fact that we're not so geared in this world right now, that you have to get into one little thing and then stay there, because the world is ever changing. So it makes all the sense in the world to me.
Thank you very much. We really, really appreciate you coming to talk with us.